Hello, and welcome to this series of conversations. So You Think You Know Security with Sarah Janes. Now, in this episode, we are talking about cyber psychology. We talk a lot about cyber threats as technical problems, but the truth is most breaches start with a human moment. So in this episode, we're looking at why behaviour change is hard, why awareness isn't enough, and how both defenders and attackers use human psychology every day. Sarah, hello.
Good afternoon.
So I'm very excited about this particular topic. Obviously, as a psychologist, this is right up my street. And I know that Layer 8, psychology is a huge part of what you do. So first of all, can you just start off by telling me, why is behaviour change so hard? From your experience of running Champions programs, what makes that so hard?
Yeah, well, I am really excited about this conversation as well. Definitely something at my heart, and really glad that you're asking me the questions. But why is it so hard? I mean, I really think that, as humans, we want to have black and white answers to things, don't we? We want to know that if I do this thing, this action is going to happen. And with people, that's not the case. You can't always say, if I do this, if I tell this person something, we automatically know that behaviour is going to change. So it's that lack of understanding, almost that weariness of, is it even possible to get people to change? And as we're going to discover, it's so complex that even being able to explain to somebody how does somebody change behaviour is a really complicated topic.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because the whole point is we know, and I talk a lot about this in my work with the clients I work with, there's a massive gap between knowing and doing, because we know that we should eat healthily. We might not do it. We know that exercise is good for us. So this gap between knowing and doing is something that I try and bridge the gap. And so when it comes to cybersecurity, it doesn't matter how much training you have. It's all about context and about pressure, and it's about habit. And also it's about motivation. Because the key thing is, as you know, Sarah, you can tell someone to you blue in the face. If they're not motivated to do it, then you're talking to a brick wall. So there's a really interesting theory. It's a self-determination theory by Ryan, which says you need 3 things to feel motivated. And I would say to people in your organisation, do you give your employees these 3 things? Well, first of all, is autonomy. How much autonomy do you have over what you do on a day-to-day? Competence. How competent do you feel to do your job? And that is where the training comes in with cybersecurity. So one could argue, hopefully, they're competent. And then there's connection. And again, that's a massive part of what you do is around the conversation. If you've got those 3 things, you're far more likely going to be motivated. But then there's another aspect as well, which even if you've got that motivation, we know what it's like working in a busy office under pressure, is when you've got that pressurized moment and something pops up, you're not sure about it, but you've also on a deadline, your boss is on your case and you've got an email that comes in. And what happens is, in those situations of extreme pressure it's a thing called amygdala hijack. So it's a fear part of your brain takes over. You are incapable of making any rational decisions. Now, what you want is the front of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is like the CEO, right? That's the one making the smart decisions. That's who should be in charge. But when we're under pressure, we lose all that. Basically, that is all that rational part of the brain goes out the window, and it's the amygdala. So it's the fear part of the brain, and you can't make rational decisions in those situations. So what's so important is creating an environment where people don't have so much pressure, where they feel supported and where they feel psychologically safe, which essentially means there's no such thing as a stupid question. And I'm curious, Sarah, what do you see in organisations when people don't feel psychologically safe? From your experience with Layer 8, what happens?
So what we see, in a security perspective is that cyber criminals are really exploiting anything that touches on that amygdala hijack, anything that kind of makes you feel slightly out of control. So anything emotional, because of course, if we are responding with our emotion, we snap back, don't we? It's a bit like road rage.
Yeah,
If we were thinking logically about how we dealt with somebody who maybe just, nipped out a little bit too soon in front of us, we probably wouldn't deal with it that way. So cyber criminals are really trying to, trip us up on fear, pressure, anxiety, time constraints, but also on the positive things as well. So things that make us feel safe and things that make us feel comfortable. And I love Cialdini's 6 principles of influence because this is something that's used in marketing. So if you look at marketing tactics, they're very similar to what cyber criminals will use to try and get us to buy their stuff.
It's really interesting because I must admit I wasn't familiar with Cialdini. Is that what you said? Yeah, I wasn't familiar with Cialdini, but I'm very familiar with heuristics, which is
Yeah.
mental shortcuts, and I think this is basically what it is, isn't it? So these mental shortcuts, they help us make decisions quickly. Like if every time we went to the supermarket, we didn't have these heuristics, it would take a long time. You know, we know what cereal to get, we know what butter we want, we know that they are mental shortcuts that help make life much simpler and easier. But the thing is, they also then create cognitive bias, right? So we think we know something or we like something because of these mental shortcuts. And sometimes they do protect us and they keep us safe. But what happens is these hackers, they exploit that. So they will take advantage of these heuristics and of this cognitive bias, and they'll latch onto something that we know makes us feel safe and secure. Like, well, that came from the boss. Again, a bit like the whole psychological safety. That came from the boss. I'm not going to challenge it because the boss knows best. So that is what they're exploiting. And basically by imitating situations where these shortcuts normally protect us, that's kind of how they get in. And so I'm curious to know about biases in cybersecurity, particularly, obviously. What organizations unknowingly reinforce these biases?
It's funny because I ask this question quite a lot to people. I say, how many of our decisions do you think you process, and you know that you process every day? And they'll be like 50%, 60%. But actually, it's something like 90 or 95% of the things that you do are just habitual.
Yeah.
They're heuristics, as you say.
Yeah.
So the ones that really catch us out, I think, in cybersecurity are things like attribution errors. So something goes wrong, something happens, there's a breach, there's a bit of a mistake, and we might investigate that. But as soon as we get to a human, we think that we've solved the answer. We're like, okay, it's the person's fault.
So and so, Jerry's fault.
Exactly, absolutely. We can sack them, we can reprimand them, we can do something. Often, actually, that's where the conversation should start. Well, why is it that person did that thing? What's the context? What's the situation? What's the environment? What's the culture? What's led them to doing that? So, yeah, attribution error is massive. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is, if somebody doesn't do something or behave in the way that we expect, it must be because they don't know or they don't get it. So we just constantly feel the need that we've got to tell them again, we've got to tell them again, we've got to tell them in a slightly different way. And actually, as you were saying earlier, we've got to look at the motivational aspects. We've also got to look at things like, is the behaviour easy? If we're asking them to have long, complex passwords, have you perhaps given them a password manager? Have you made the action easy for them? And also, let's remember, we need to prompt them as well, because people aren't sitting there doing security all day, every day. They're doing 101 other things. They're in marketing, they're in sales. In security, for us, it might seem obvious, but we need to prompt people. And that model is BJ Fogg's B equals behaviour equals motivation, ability, and prompt. A great method for creating new habits.
And a big part of that is constant conversations, isn't it? It's constant dialogue. And I know that at Layer 8, conversation is catalyst for change, is kind of your catchphrase.
It is.
Catchphrase?
I was going to say catchphrase. I like catchphrase, yeah.
I wasn't sure. I was like dumbing it down a little bit. Why is dialogue? Why is it kind of more important than just policies or e-learning?
Yeah. Do you know what I always say to people? Raise your hands if you've ever changed your behaviour after reading a policy. And people are like, no, definitely not. But conversations give context, they give meaning, we can dive deep, we can ask people questions. And that's really important, because as a security team, we might understand what a risk is and why it's important. But actually, somebody who is working in the same team as you can really give that context, why it should be important to you. But it also has to be the right type of conversation, okay? Because, just going and barking at somebody, conversations, if they're not done in the right way, can be really destructive, or they can be critical, or they can just be nice conversations but don't move things forward. So it's really important that people know how to have a good quality conversation, how to ask really good questions.
Open questions, I'm assuming.
Yeah, exactly. Questions that, seek to understand somebody, because we don't always understand people's situations or why. Questions that seek to understand, it's questions that get that shared understanding of a situation are really, really powerful.
And really, a sort of closing question for this conversation around cyber psychology. I think it's interesting if both of us think about what is the one thing do you think, first of all, is important for an organization to understand about human behavior?
So I would say really understanding that everybody's an individual. You can't solve people and have a one size fits all answer for people. You've got to make time to get to know people, to get to understand people, and that takes time and effort. What about you, Charlotte?
Well, it's really similar, really. And basically, it's all about, again, it's about the humans. People don't kind of mess up because they don't care or they don't know. They struggle because of pressure and context and habit, which you spoke about before. And if organizations, they need to design for how humans actually behave rather than they hope or expect them to behave. And in that's how performance and security will improve. People aren't the weakest link. They're human, and systems need to be built around that.
Mm-hmm. And there's something interesting that I'll drop in. There's a concept about work as imagined versus work as done. And we do often imagine in security that people are doing all these things. So we've got to design these sorts of controls around them. But if we actually open up and have a conversation, we might find that the situation is different, and then we can build and design in a way that fits them.
Yeah, well, this is the end of this conversation. We should be having many more conversations. And the whole, obviously, for me as a psychologist, this is something that I just can talk about. And I know it's really important to you. So this psychology will be threaded in throughout the rest of the series. So please do keep watching. You can find us on YouTube. And thank you for watching this time. And we will see you for the next episode.